Scott Joplin's Maple Leaf Rag, as you know, is probably his most famous piece ever. It made him so much money when he wrote it that it totally covered his income for the rest of his life. I know a lot of musicians who would like to be able to say the same thing. It also made Joplin the king of ragtime, and the sales, like I said, of that sheet music provided the income for the rest of his life. But I want to be honest. I want to start with a very transparent, brutally honest admission. As a young performer, when I was first going to music school, I avoided Scott Joplin's music like the plague. The reason was because I was trying to become a serious classical musician. And so for me, I stuck to the angst of Rachmaninoff and the irony of Prokofiev. Ironically, I had no idea that Scott Joplin had fought so hard for the very respect that was evading him, even in my early performances. It wasn't until later in life that I grew to understand who he was, appreciate his contributions. And I will tell you that I learned Joplin for the first time for this event. And in the first 30 seconds of playing his music, I realized that not only was it music, but it was a miracle. Because knowing what Scott Joplin lived through, the darkness that he witnessed in his lifetime, the miracle was the fact that you couldn't hear it in this music. There's so much joy there that I realized it was such a miracle to be able to compose the music that he did. I hope that you'll have some of the same exciting discoveries as I have as I've gotten to know the music of Scott Joplin, and as you hear some of these incredible Joplin experts take the stage tonight. Joplin was born near Texarkana, Texas, and we actually don't know the exact date of his birth, but November 24th, 1868, 150 years ago, this time right here, we're able to celebrate this anniversary. That's the date that's officially recorded on his gravestone, so we're gonna roll with that date for our purposes. Joplin's father was an ex-slave. His mother was a free-born person. And like all good music students, he was tutored in classical music theory and keyboard technique in Texas. Like all of the greatest musicians, he got away from home as fast as he could. And as a teenager, he traveled around the country playing music, including attending the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, where he played in a band outside of the fairgrounds. He finally settled in Missouri, where he earned a living as a piano teacher and performer while he continued composing. In 1907, Joplin moved right here to New York City with the hopes of producing one of his operas. In his lifetime, Joplin wrote more than 40 rags, waltzes, and marches for piano, and he composed 2 operas, one titled A Guest of Honor, which is lost to us. The other you'll hear a bit of tonight, Treemonisha. He also wrote several songs for voice and piano, a number of other works, including a piano concerto, which to my chagrin has also been lost to us. At only 48 years old, Joplin died in New York of syphilis in 1917. At the time, he was penniless and largely forgotten. His grave at St. Michael's Cemetery in East Elmhurst, Queens, went unmarked for decades. But tonight, we are celebrating all of the great music that he gave us in his 48 years on this earth. I want to bring to the stage now a legend in his own right. We have Roy Eaton with us. I wanted you to understand how important this is to have him performing with us tonight. He began studying classical music. He was a bit of a slacker. He started at the age of 6 years old. He didn't get to Carnegie Hall until 7. A year later, he won the first Kosciuszko Foundation Chopin competition in 1950, and he made his concert debut with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra in 1951. In addition to specializing in both the music of Frédéric Chopin and Scott Joplin, Roy Eaton is an award-winning advertising copywriter and jingle composer. No free time there, right? Roy, you can come onto the stage. He has given me permission to share something else very unique, very personal, and very powerful. Back in 2017, Mr. Eaton suffered a pretty severe stroke. It was the kind that doesn't forecast well. He was given only a 3% chance of survival. Obviously, you can see that he defied the odds. He did so because of an innovative program at Mount Sinai. They have a special program specializing in the type of stroke that he suffered. And because of the treatment, the surgery they provided him, he has made a complete recovery. His doctors were most worried that he would not be able to regain not just his performance of music, but his appreciation for it. I think you will see that tonight we're not just hearing music, but we are witnessing literally a miracle. Please, he will begin with a piece called Solace. Welcome, Roy Eaton.
Thank you. It is my honor to be a part of this program celebrating a great classical composer. Yes, that's how Scott Joplin viewed himself and his works. When he came here to New York with the intention of having his opera, Treemonisha, published. Instead, he had one of the themes of the opera stolen and created into what became a very popular Alexander's Ragtime band. But that didn't stop him. And in fact, as Jade mentioned, the quality of Joplin's work that is most miraculous is that it is expressive of so much joy. I have a positive experience to share with you that came about not despite, but because of my stroke. And that is what I call a 21st century parable, and that's this. Your life is a drama in which you are the star and the director, but you're not the writer. And so that when I got that stroke, that's something that I wrote in. But it was something that revealed for me an opportunity to perhaps parallel in my life what Joplin showed in his. That every event is an opportunity to create joy for others. The first piece I will play is properly titled Solace. And when he came to New York, he needed a lot of solace. He was not, his opera was, as I said, not published. And in fact, having taken it around to a lot of publishers, an intern borrowed, shall we say, one of the themes of A Real Slow Drag, and he made a nice pop hit for himself. He was himself a very good composer, but in a moment of weakness, he borrowed a theme from Scott Joplin. Out of his experience, he created a composition that offers us all joy and inspiration. And I hope that my appearance, the fact that I was given a 3% chance to be alive, has given me not only an appreciation of the fact that I can still play the piano, but even more important, that I can see the life journey that each one of us is taking is in and of itself the greatest reward that any of us can experience. And in this wonderful season of Thanksgiving, we have the opportunity to be thankful for it all.
I joked earlier that, you were taking your time in getting to Carnegie, waiting until you were 7 years old. I'm curious, when you were practicing all of the classics that you were probably preparing, had you already encountered Joplin's music by then? When did you first hear his music?
Ironically, I didn't hear Joplin's music and didn't really appreciate Joplin's music until I went into advertising.
Ah.
And it was introduced to me by an Irish copywriter who liked the voice, not the piano playing, but the voice of Max Morath. And used him for commercials that we were writing for Hardee's.
Ah.
And through Max Morath, I was introduced to the wonder, and that's the only word to describe the music of Scott Joplin, how he was able to create the beauty that he did. There's a running joke now, driving while being black, or walking while being black. Of course, implying one of the major heritages of the American experience. Writing classical music while being black. The initial term for Joplin's and other composers' music were jigs, and it was not meant in a complimentary manner. How could anything conceived by and written by a black be anything but worthless? Of course, we all possess within us a heart that is connected with the universal spirit of love that created us all, and the joy that this man created with his music was inescapable. It inspired other great classical musicians like Debussy. The Golliwogg's Cakewalk, for example, is supposed to be a rag. Ravel, Hindemith, Stravinsky, the list goes on and on. And this was before the internet or television or radio. The only communication was with a steamboat, and yet this music swept the world. And finally, we were able to rediscover it thanks to a movie, The Sting, in which, unfortunately, Joplin was not around to get his Oscar. But Marvin Hamlish did a service by reintroducing us to this great man's work.
I'm hoping that you will reintroduce us now to Scott Joplin's original rags.
Even though the maple leaf was the rag that made him internationally famous, it was not the first rag published. The first rag was this piece called Original Rags. And unfortunately, on the initial sheet of the publishing, he wasn't even given credit for composing it, but rather it was as if this music existed somehow in folklore, and it says on the sheet, picked by Scott Joplin, arranged by Charles Daniels, the publisher. Well, these were the attitudes that since the Reconstruction era in America have plagued the African American, and yet, despite that, this man created such beauty. Here, original rags.
Troy Eaton. Thank you, Roy. Coming to the stage next, our next guest is poet and professor of English at the CUNY College in Staten Island. His book, Olio, won the 2017 Pulitzer Prize. The publisher describes the book as part fact, part fiction, and Olio examines the lives of mostly unrecorded African-American performers just before and after the Civil War, up to World War I. Scott Joplin plays an important role in the book, and Jess imagines interviews with people who knew him as a way of revealing who the very mysterious Scott Joplin really was. Here now to read from his book, Olio, is poet Tyehimba Jess.
Hello, folks. It's really an honor to be here with such esteemed performers and hosts, and with y'all in the audience, and to share some words about Scott Joplin. So I'm going to read from this book, Olio, which came out in 2016. In the book, the book is about African American creatives at the end of the 19th century up into World War I, more or less. And in the book, there's a series of interviews by a guy who is obsessed with finding the story of Scott Joplin. Unfortunately, he's obsessed after his departure from this plane. So he goes around the country interviewing people that used to know Scott Joplin. Our interviewer is also a World War I vet who's been scarred in battle, but he's going around and interviewing people. And one of the people he interviews is another piano player named Blind Boone, who's out of Missouri, who's another famous ragtime composer, and would have had reason to run across Scott Joplin. So our interviewer is imaginary, Blind Boone was real, and somewhere in between those two things comes this stretch of interview right here. So, for starters, Mr. Boone, how did you meet Mr. Joplin? Ha! Yes, we met in the middle of a storm. He was scheming to take my money, but he was going to have to play that piano like I'd never heard if he was going to walk away with $1,000 cash. Man walked in on a July 4th concert in Sedalia, 97. It had been thundering all that day, storming and outside to the point where we almost called the concert off, had to take it from the park to inside the old 400 Club, where all the colored swells would meet. If you wanted to get a nice crowd, that was the place to be. So the rain was a bit of luck for me because it pushed them all inside to pay their money and listen to the music. I guess Joplin thought it'd be a little luck for him, too. Like always, at the very end of the concert, we issued our call. Your call? Challenge! Anyone getting up on that piano that could play something that I couldn't play back, note for note, I give up $1,000. That's a lot of money. It ain't nothing to sneeze at. But see, most folks don't want to risk getting beat by a blind man. Takes a special kind of person to duel it out with a man that ain't got no eyes. Some might say that kind of person ain't got no sympathy or class. And if they get beat, then folk might think that they got no chops. And that's part of what we were banking on. But then again, there was always those that thought I was a trickster or a con man, so they had to try. And then there were those who just wanted to match me, and those who wanted to learn. I couldn't tell which one of those Joplin was when he hollered out for the challenge and stepped on that stage, but I could smell the storm clouds on him when he walked up on there, like he was dragging trouble at his feet. And then it was what he said when he shook my hand. Follow me. All I could do was chuckle. And then he got on that piano, commenced to playing a train wreck. He was that bad? Bad? No, sir, wasn't bad at all. And he was damn full of himself. That's for sure. He got on that piano and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, a new composition of mine, which you may purchase in your local store. A tune derived from the latest spectacle of Texas, the Great Crush Collision March." What a ham. I'm telling you, son, if I had any eyes, they'd have rolled all the way out my head just from hearing that. Had the nerve to saunter up on my stage and ring his own bell. Yes, the Crush Collision March, the one based on, and this is a true story here. A train wreck. The MK&T Railroad Spectacle, 96. Those folks ran 2 locomotives together just to see what it would look like and to make money from all the folks rolling in to see it. Had 2 old locomotives with boxcars full of steel face off, back up 4 miles apart, struck the throttles in gear, jumped the crew off each one, and let them roar at each other at 50 miles an hour each. 40,000 folks showed up. Can you believe that? The things people pay to see. And people pity me while they busy wasting their own sight. Them trains ran together all right. Both boilers busted, killed 3 people. So this was when Joplin debuted that tune. Indeed he did. Played it right there. His right hand was one train and the left was the other. Let's see. Yeah, he starts playing. Yeah, that's it. Hear them 2 trains running at each other? He plays until the end. That's exactly how I played it back to him, too. Note for note, like he played it. But since he had to come up on my stage and bark a little, I was going to have to show him how to bite. I said, "Well, friend, seems to me that if you want it to really sound like a crush, you ain't got enough crash in it yet. You got to lean on it a little to make that whistle blow. Something like this is what I said. So then I steamed it up a little like so." He plays accelerando while talking. You hear them trains coming out that station? Hear them old engines talking, knowing they going to their final stop? Rolling full steam with no conductor for the first time, whistling down that track all free. Hear that? Crescendo, diminuendo. That's how to play it, friend. Well, I could hear the crowd, but I couldn't hear much out of him. But he was standing there all right. Just heard a little cough, and then what I thought was a cough turned into a chuckle. And I felt his hand on my shoulder. He leaned over in my ear. "Blind, huh? Not by a long shot." Very true, my friend. Very true. We shook hands. He was still a ham, but I had to give him credit for walking away with dignity. It was a nice piece of work, that tune. Just need a bit more drama in the execution. Worry about the wonder that draws folks in and the tragedy that strikes back when they least expect. You know, I heard tell that the photographer of that railroad monstrosity lost an eye from a flying boat out that train. Imagine that. Go to catch an image, end up losing an eyeball. Them was some spiteful trains, all right. I hope it was worth it. But that was the last time you met him? Well, no. But I was rolling all over the place back then. Didn't stay home so much. I heard he'd moved to Sedalia, and of course, I heard all that ragtime he pulled out of his head. He gone and turned into a regular professor. Yes, I was hearing his name out in the world on a steady basis, and I heard that he'd found a bride and was starting a family. But Joplin, he was one of those people who seemed like every step forward there was a step back. His baby caught consumption, died at 6 months, and soon after that, the marriage was over. But his music, just listen to it. He begins to play phrasing songs as he goes. Those tunes were just building up deeper and wider, like a plot of land where he was building a house. Room after room getting added on. In one sunny parlor, he'd have the entertainer. In another room with all the shades drawn, he'd have a something doing. And swinging on the porch, you got pleasant moments. Turn the corner, and in the den, there'd be Swipesy doing that cakewalk. And then he got himself a nice little garden all around the place. He plays reference in each rag. A maple leaf, sunflower, peach tree, pineapple, weeping willow, chrysanthemum, sycamore, even a little sugar cane. Yes, I guess you could say he was building a whole house of music, even when his own house was falling down around him. I guess he was trying to build something for his next shot at life, you know. So, when was the last time you met? Well, I didn't really conversate with him much at all. At least not till he came back on that stage with me again. That must have been around '05, I think. We talked twice. First time was at a concert in Columbia. I invited the maestro to come up and play a tune or two. And when he played them rags, son, let me tell you, hot stuff. Seemed like I couldn't smell those rain clouds on him at all no more. He was full of sun, even when he had pain in his playing. Turned out he was getting hitched again, planning a honeymoon and all that. You should have heard him. Didn't need to brag much. His piano work did it all for him. But of course he had to brag a little on his damsel. I tell you, she's 12 years younger than me, but she seems like she'd been here before, you know. And man, I don't mean to, but if you could see her, you forget Joplin. I ain't blind. I hear her all over you. And it was true. You could hear her in every note. You know, it was like he had her living up in that house with him. You could hear her inside them tunes when he played them, roaming around and sitting on the porch, running around that garden, lying in the shade. You know, I never met her, but I know I heard her. Anyway, like I said, Joplin was always one step up and then one back. And then when they went on that train for the honeymoon and she caught cold, well, nobody could have known it would be pneumonia. And who would have known that she'd be gone after only 2 months? I think I'm gonna stop there. And thank you.
I'm curious, in all your studies about Joplin, what surprised you the most to discover?
You know, I think the thing that surprised me was his grit. He came to New York. He was trying to make a way for himself. He was not well paid at all, but he never stopped. And he was very successful for his time, but he was also very struggling. So I think that kind of surprised me.
And what was the significance of the period for you that you covered, the significance of the era between Civil War and World War I?
Well, you know, you're listening to Ragtime, you're listening to Scott and the people in the book. They're experiencing creative lives, their creative careers for the first time as black people in this country, making their decisions about what they were going to play, when they were going to play it, what instrument they were going to play for themselves and for their own edification. And that was just the beginning of a brand new era of understanding of what music could do in the public sphere. And Scott Joplin was standard bearer in that. So he's interesting because he was the hardest one in the book to write about in a lot of ways because people know so much about him. And so I had to find a different way to do it.
I think you did that powerfully. Hence the Pulitzer Prize, yes? Thank you. We're going to hear more from you later. So thank you. Thank you so much, Tayamba. Our next performer is a multi-instrumentalist, though we could only talk him into playing one instrument tonight. He's someone who can transport listeners back to the 1920s and 30s through his musicality as well as his storytelling. Geron Blind Boy Paxton grew up in South Central Los Angeles. I think we have a fan here, yes. Listening to jazz, blues, and soul on the radio, and as he describes it, on his grandmother's ghetto blaster. He's a regular at blues festivals all over the world, including the Newport Folk Festival, as well as right here at Carnegie Hall. Paxton is not quite 30 years old, but he is certainly making his mark on the music of a century ago. Please welcome to the stage, Geron Blind Boy Paxton.
Thank you, friends. Y'all know how to make a fella feel welcome. I'm gonna play you a song that one of my music teachers would be very proud that I was playing for you. He's so proud because he saw my autodidactical attitude. The rest of the guitar class was struggling with a piece of God knows what. I didn't want to play God knows what. You know, I come from people with taste. I wanted to get to some music quickly. And I brought some music with me to learn. He was struggling to find time to show it to me. He said, all right, Jaron, while I teach these kids the A, B's, and C's, you go out there and work on this little piece of music you want to get so bad. I was gone about a half an hour. Song I pulled out and crept through each line. You know, I'm not one of them fast music readers. It takes me about 3 or 4 days to get to 3 or 4 pages, you understand? But, you know, you learn slow, you forget slow. Took me all day to learn that song, and I ain't forgot it yet. The Entertainer.
I have to let Tyamba know we found our other ham for the night. Looks like it was just amazing.
I'm Jewish, but I like ham.
You know, if my two little kids were here, they would have had a hard time being quiet when they heard that because they think of that as the song that the ice cream truck plays. I'm curious, when was the first time you experienced Joplin's music?
Well, as you can tell by the amount of space I take up, I have overcome anorexia. And I'm very familiar with ice cream trucks. And this is, in fact, one of my favorite ice cream truck pieces. That along with Turkey in the Straw.
Yes.
That's one of the first places you come across Joplin in factual real life. It's one of the first places that people come in contact with ragtime.
Yeah.
It's from the ice cream truck and from things that seem to be, it's an archaic machine playing archaic tunes, but there's this trend in America where things of a generation, say 2 or 3 generations before, that weren't necessarily meant for kids, get to be kid things. Like, I've been working on the railroad. That's not a kid song. That is not a kid song by far. But same thing with the music of these houses where, my family's from Louisiana, where what you call them? They call them the upstairs baby houses. What does that mean? $2 go upstairs, baby.
I feel bad for the audience because I got to be backstage and hear you play your banjo as well. Just very quickly tell us, how many instruments do you play?
Publicly, I play 5 instruments.
Oh, wow.
And go around the world demonstrating various forms of folk music from my culture and cultures around the world.
I'm going to let you perform again. You're doing Consumer's Rag, which is not by Joplin, so tell us a bit about it and then have at it.
Sounds good. The Consumer's Rag comes from the city of New Orleans, a city known for jazz and good music and a mixture of people. The guitar had been in Louisiana more than it had been in any place. Louisiana was controlled by the Spanish for many a year, although it's more known for its French culture. But the guitar had been around there a while, so blues on the guitar had been around there a while. And this song was, I heard this song by a neighbor who had died probably about 60 years before I was born. But who was the banjoist for the Hot Fives and Hot Sevens of New Orleans, as well as Jelly Roll Morton and King Oliver and any other great band around there. He was the banjoist and the guitarist, Mr. Johnny St. Cyr. And he moved to my neighborhood like a bunch of other Creole people did when they finished the 10 freeway. And then in the decade before the Civil Rights Movement, when things got pretty hairy, a lot of people decided to get on that big road and come out west, where there was freedom and a lack of humidity. And if you're from Louisiana, that means a whole lot to you, both of us. So you could bring the crawfish and the gumbo, but that humidity must stay back home. Johnny learned from a duo that played mandolin and guitar that was called Jack and Jill, and he would study with them once a week, and after about half dozen lessons or so, he got to be the Johnny St. Cyr we all know. Fantastic musician and well-renowned and everybody's favorite in New Orleans. He would play in this group that was mandolin and guitar, and they drank Consumer's beer, and so they started calling themselves the Consumer's Band. This song, when Johnny St. Cyr played it, didn't have a name. As a matter of fact, it's listed in the Library of Congress as the unidentified rag. But I'm a performer, and you can't go around telling your audience this is the unidentified rag. So to simplify it and not get asked annoying questions, I dubbed it the Consumer's Rag.
Pianist and composer Dave Burrell has been performing for more than 5 decades. He has recorded 40 records of his own, as well as collaborating on 130 others with artists such as David Murray, Archie Shepp, and Pharoah Sanders. This past year, Burrell was honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Vision Festival in New York. He's also been the composer in residence at the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia. Burrell has been an advocate for the music of Joplin and Joplin's contemporaries throughout his career. Tonight, he's going to play The Easy Winners by Scott Joplin, and he's going to tell us a little more about Joplin's influence on 20th century music. Welcome to the stage, Dave Burrell.
Wow, it's great to be here. And I'm inspired by Roy and Geronimo. Ay, ay, ay. You know, I'm from Louisiana too, Alexandria. And I never forget, I wasn't born there, I was born in Ohio. Middletown, but when we were in Middletown at my grandfather's house, we drove next week back to Harlem, and that's where I started out. But I talked to producer Bill McLaughlin on the phone today, just to find out what was expected of me. And he said, well, could you put together what James P. Johnson did coming from the soul of Scott Joplin? And I said, let me try to understand. You mean the evolution of ragtime and how it morphed into jazz slowly, even though it was classical, it still had this influence. And remember, jazz is part classical anyway. And the experience in Louisiana and Texas especially, it's the heartbeat of blues and church and Spanish and a kind of turmoil after the Civil War that made everybody one, even if they didn't know they were one. So you heard these folk songs, and it's very easy to say, oh, he didn't write that. He picked that because it's just like the Mississippi River. Lie after lie, or truth after truth. You can just say everybody's part of the one. So what I did, I said, Bill, I said, let me try to get what stands out most about the evolution of Scott Joplin is the minor second. And if you have a minor second, you're not in a diatonic mode anymore. And James P. Johnson's Carolina Shout starts out with 3 minor seconds, and they are in a cluster in the right hand. And since it's 6 notes, you need 1 finger from your left hand in order to play them. Thanks so much. And with the idea of all these great jazz improvising pianists, composers, you see there's Joplin everywhere. It's not only in the minor second, it's in the syncopation. And remember when Geronimo was playing the guitar, you heard a da-da-da-da-da-da, boom, da-da-da-da-da. And it's almost like it's international now, when it just came out of the Deep South. And everybody knows that it came from love and pain, just like all the folk music everywhere in the world, right? So I told Bill McLaughlin, I said, I want to just put together something that came from Joplin and moved up through James P. Johnson, Gershwin, and Jelly Roll Morton, and have that swing and still be relevant to the avant-garde that came with every decade since the Civil War.
Oh, you're wonderful. Thank you so much. Great, great. Thank you. Thank you, Dave Burrell. We mentioned earlier that Joplin moved to New York in hopes of completing and producing and publishing his opera, Treemonisha, his third stage piece for which he also wrote the libretto. It tells the story of an adopted daughter of former slaves Ned and Monisha. Now get this, the couple found a baby under a tree and named her, what else? Treemonisha. The opera was a reflection on African American culture at the turn of the 19th century. They were trying to be part of the mainstream American culture, but still hold on to their African traditions and superstitions. Another main theme of the opera is the importance of education for all, men and women. Joplin was never able to raise enough money, unfortunately, to have the opera produced in his lifetime. In fact, there wasn't even a full stage production until 1972, and that was produced by Morehouse College in Atlanta, directed by Katherine Dunham, and conducted by Robert Shaw. Good news is, Joplin received the Pulitzer Prize. Problem was, he was already dead when they awarded it to him in 1977. Coming to the stage, we're about to have another treat. We have pianist Joshua Rifkin, who is renowned the world over. Yes. Conductor, pianist, musicologist. He is known as a Scott Joplin expert. He's considered to be central to the Joplin revival in the 1970s. His recording of Scott Joplin's Rags sold more than 1 million copies. He's going to be joined by soprano singing an aria from the Treemonisha, soprano Laquita Mitchell, who has been praised by Opera News for her purity of tone and vivid theatrical presence. She's a Metropolitan Opera National Council Auditions Grand Prize winner, and she's performed with opera companies throughout the US and the world, including New York City Opera, San Francisco, LA, Houston Grand Opera, as well as the Opera Comique in Paris. She's going to sing tonight The Sacred Tree from Scott Joplin's opera, Treemonisha. Joining her will be Joshua Rifkin at piano. Please welcome them both.
Somewhere near that sacred tree, and as I listened, it seemed to be somewhere near that secret tree. I came out in the yard to see and find out where the child could be. And there in rags the baby laid, sheltered by the trees' cool shade. I found it where I thought 'twould be, there beside that sacred tree. I found it where I thought 'twould be, there beside that sacred tree. I took the child into our home, and now the darling girl is grown. All I've said to you is true. The child I've told you of is you. Take not a leaf, but leave them be on that dear old sacred tree. Take not a leaf, but leave them be on that dear old sacred tree. So now with me you must agree not to harm that sacred tree. So now with me you must agree not to harm that sacred tree.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah. Now, Joshua, you probably played this quite a few times, but I know, Laquita, for you, this is a first attempt, yes, which was beautifully done. Tell us about your discoveries as you've been working on the Joplin. This is your first time performing this aria. What have you been discovering?
Well, this is the second time that I performed Sacred Tree, but we've made a lot of cuts. It's pretty strophic, and but the second piece, the real slow drag, is my first time actually singing it. I am not that familiar with the opera of Tremonisha. I actually had to do a lot of research in order to understand what was actually happening and who I was. The first aria, Sacred Tree, is sung by Monisha, the mezzo soprano, and now the second aria, a real slow drag, is sung by Tremonisha, who's a soprano. So I'm playing double duty tonight. Like George Gershwin, I would say that Scott Joplin meant for this opera to, for the audience to see many, many, many styles and facets of his writing. He actually, studied classically and understood Weber and Wagner and all the greats, and he wanted everyone to understand that he understood that. And so the opera incorporates spirituals, call and response, things of that nature, and this is operetta. It contains so much. So these pieces are actually really, I think, what he wanted the world to hear.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll have to say that, surprisingly enough, I have never played this before. It has been my hope. I have conducted parts of Treemonisha, and it's my hope someday to be able to conduct the entire opera, perhaps with the most wonderful Treemonisha. But what Laquita is saying about the piece is very true. It's an extraordinary piece. It is not an easy piece on stage, but for those of us who know and love it, that doesn't matter. The piece sums up all of Joplin's hopes, his dreams for the people from whom he came, what his music could be. And as you see, this is not at all a ragtime opera. It is a piece really mostly in European style with elements, with folk elements from the African American tradition, all blended together very artfully. And it indeed demonstrates what a broad vision musically Joplin had, and how he, of course, also felt that the music and the tradition from which he came deserved its place in this world of, as Roy Eaton was saying earlier, of classical music. He once said, "To shy bricks at hateful ragtime no longer passes for musical culture."
Can you set us up for a real slow drag, and then I'll let you have at it?
This is the very end of the opera. This is after Treemonisha has been chosen by the community of former slaves who are still in the grip of superstition, to teach them and lead them. She has learned to read and write, and she, at the age of 18, will now lead them out of their darkness into an enlightenment. She asked them, there's a wonderful chorus before the slow drag, where they select her as their leader, and she asks them, the women will follow me, but will the men follow me? And in chorus they say, yes, yes, we will. So there's another message in this opera as well. And then at the end, she invites the community to celebrate and commemorate the occasion by dancing the slow drag. And the slow drag is a very formal, very restrained and elegant dance, and so is the music to which Joplin sets it and sets a crown on this opera.
Salute your partner to the drag, drag. Stop and move backward to the drag. All of you stop. Look to your right and to the drag, drag, drag. To your left, that's the way. Marching onward, marching to that lovely tune. Marching onward, happy as a bird in June. Sliding onward, they sing to the drag. Hop and skip, no, do that slow, do that slow drag. Move along, don't stop, dancing, drag along, stop.
We're going to bring back to the stage now our resident poet for the eventide, Jess, who's going to read a passage from his book, Olio. It's an interview this time with Della Marie Jenkins, who's a nurse who took care of Joplin when he was in an asylum at the end of his life. Please welcome back to the stage, Tayimba Jess.
Hello, folks. It's what amazing music I have been witness to today. Can I get a hand for that? Oh, man. Still doing it, Scott. So this is one last section of an interview with our friend who is interviewing people that used to know Scott Joplin. And in this case, he is interviewing someone who's also imaginary, but her name is Della Marie Jenkins, and she's a nurse who was in the New York State mental hospital tending to Scott in his final days. So here we go. The interviewer says, "I believe Mr. Joplin was making power out of his music." Well, that may be true, but by the time I ran across him, all that power was mostly nothing but a string of notes rambling through that deathly old hospital air. Wasn't enough to save him or nobody else in the end. Yes, well, the end. Could you tell me about it? How he spent his last days? His last days, huh? Well, if I remember right, it was syphilis took him down. Slow way to go. Must have had it for years, because by the time he got to the hospital, he was barely moving. You know, funny thing is, I didn't even know who he was till about 2 weeks after he came there. He didn't play much at all while I knew him. What were your duties with Mr. Joplin? Bathing, feeding, tending bed sores. Wasn't much to be done by that point, but dose him up and let him move on from this world. He didn't say much, moved very little, except when I would hold him up for bathing. He would try to play his scales on the bedside table. I would be wiping him down while he played rags on that invisible piano, all slow motion and stiff, all herky-jerky like a rusted-up gadget. So far gone into his dreams, he didn't know much of whoever came to visit. But he knew how to find middle C, knew how to grow something in his head nobody else could hear. Of course, that might have been the sickness talking. But there he was, with music stuck all up in his hands. Him trying to work it all out before he left. How did he play? Like I said, he didn't play much, except when he was all feeble finger twitching in the air, or on the table, or on the wall, or on his stretched out legs. But one last time, he played that real piano in the great room. I think it had been months since he touched a key. Really wasn't supposed to have him down there, as he was terminal care and all, but did it matter? That's what I thought anyway. Man about to pass on over, you might as well have one last play. Wheeled him down there a few days before he passed, let him sit in a wheelchair stacked up on pillows. Didn't do nothing for such a long time, nothing but stare at the keys, his eyes all empty like broken pails. But then he moved, a little. It was like watching raw sap coming out of a tree. He was moving so slow. And when he hit that first note, it barely made a sound. By the end, he wasn't nothing but a tremble. What did he play? Well, now, I must confess that I don't know all of those songs. Most I know is how he played, what it was sounding like. So at first, he played pretty good, you know, like the kind of good you want to tell somebody about just right before you doze off. The kind of notes that come strong at first and then fade to the next till you wonder where you began and they end at. Then other times, it make me want to just look away. You look up from the keys and through me, through the brick and mortar ward, through Manhattan, like he was looking out a window, wondering whether to jump, half blind 1 second, sway-headed like a newborn the next. And when he played like that, it was, well, old-timey 1 minute, then lovely terrible. Like he had another life in the music, but he couldn't get it all the way out to save him in this one. Or like he was playing another language on the keys, begging us to hear it with him. And then sometimes playing all slow, like he wanted us to learn every note. Then other times he'd be frantic, digging through them black and whites, like he was looking for something he lost, what was left of himself. Was it ragtime? Yes, sir, it was ragtime, all right. And then it was just plain raggedy, all stitched together, loose in some parts and painful tight in others. Heard a cakewalk in there, but then the walk started to lean too hard and got drunk off its own sway. Heard some spirituals, near my God to thee, most done toiling here, but they wore too much pride to be prayerful. Heard a hint of that new blue music, but he let the keys sing too free to be truly sorrowed. It was a true mix-up, boy, I'm telling you. Didn't know rightly how to feel after he stopped. Wasn't no way to know whether a man should just take his hat off his head or throw it up in the air. Whether a woman should put her hands together over and over or just hold them up to her mouth with a silent prayer. So we all just sat there and watched, silent, the sick, the dying, the nurses. We watched them crawl all over that keyboard like a beggar in the gutter and a king on the sauce. Watched him leave half his life spread across the keys till he left himself half dead. That ragtime man, maybe he knew something we didn't know, though. I could have swore when he was playing that last tune in the great room that he was just glowing with something I ain't never seen before. Almost like he was listening to it and smiling deep inside himself. How long did he play? Huh? What's time got to do with it? Long enough, son. Long enough.
to thank all of the performers tonight. As a matter of fact, hopefully they haven't gone too far. Everybody come back to the stage. Joshua Rifkin, Laquita Mitchell, Dave Burrell, Geron Blind Boy Paxton, Tyimba Jess, Mr. Roy Eaton. Here they all are. Big round of applause. We also want to give special thanks tonight to Albert Imperato and Bill McClellan for their help with this program. Have you not been treated to something special tonight? Yes? I knew we had a good thing going when I saw all of the toes tapping. Yes? Please. Once again. Get out of your way here. We take a bow, yes? Big bow, big bow. Thank you. Thank you so much. I am Jade Simmons. We thank you all for coming, and we would be remiss if we didn't end the night by saying happy birthday, Scott Joplin. Thank you, and have a good evening.